Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Pilates Hour with Polestar. And today we are so excited as you come on to introduce you to Angela Crowley. Good to have you, Angela.
Such a pleasure to be here, Brent. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about the topic.
Yeah, it's going to be a good day today. We have lots of information to share, and Angela has just so much experience. And just to give you a little history, she was my gyrotonic instructor probably 20 something years ago. But we have worked together for almost 3 decades. Can you believe that? It's been like since the early 90s, 94, 93, somewhere around there that we
You
started
know,
working together.
I was thinking about that, and you and I share a fascination with the potential of movement to positively influence lives. And it's like our conversations have been a catalyst, almost like two people climbing a mountain in tandem, right? And feeding off each other as we go along.
It has been a journey, and we've crossed paths so many times. We've shared space, we've worked together. Like I said, you were an educator for me and for Shelley and for a lot of our Polestar Pilates grads that went on to expand their training into gyrotonic expansion method. So just it's been a great journey, and today is no exception. While people are coming on, I just want to make sure that people are doing a little shout out inside the chat. I love to have our guests tell us where they're joining us from, and some of them are you might
Fun.
recognize. I don't know if you have it open or not, but they love to join us. And we typically have, lately we've been well over 5,000 people registering. A lot of them watch it afterwards, Angela, but we typically have, close to 100 or so that come on live. So today will be a special day. Before we get started, too, I just want to introduce Angela as she's a master gyrotonic educator. She is a Feldenkrais practitioner. She is a very well-known and respected body worker. She's been trained in many other things, and today she's blessing us to talk about her work in neuroplasticity. And she has a new course that's coming out. She's excited to share with us today later on. But today we're going to dive into neuroplasticity and really looking at more of a holistic transformation in the way that we as movement teachers can really facilitate a greater change. And also that greater change through better skill sets, softer, um, cueing and ways of being able to really facilitate the capture or what we'll talk about neuroplasticity and movement. So, Angela, why don't you give us a little introduction of what you're looking forward to sharing with us today?
Well, the new science of neuroplasticity really does provide vast new opportunities for us as movement practitioners. And we're going to talk a lot about why the marriage between neuroplasticity and movement and dive into that and make sense of that. Um, once upon a time, it was thought that the brain was fixed and that we did most of our learning at a certain age, and later on we were destined to start becoming forgetful, less able to learn. And what the new science has taught us is that that's just not at all true,
Yeah.
that we're capable of learning, growing, changing throughout our entire lifespans. And and my favorite working definition of neuroplasticity comes from Dr. Norman Doidge, who's the author of the New York bestsellers, The Brain That Changes Itself and The Brain That Heals Itself, which speaks to Feldenkrais, actually.
Mm.
So his working definition is the property of the brain that allows it to change its structure, its structure and its function in response to thinking, and acting in response to mental experience, in other words, sensing and perceiving what we do. And we're going to come back to those ideas again and again because those words all really embody movement. And and I love that the holistic description that includes doing as well as thinking as well as sensing. So we're constantly rewiring, and we're either rewiring for positive neuroplastic change or negative, but we're never neutral. So
Mm.
every choice we're making and our thoughts in what we're doing and how we're moving is taking us in one direction or the other. And
And I was going to say, I like that comment of one direction or the other, because I know some of the things we've been looking at with neuroplasticity, especially dealing with things like chronic pain, is that we can neuroplastic ourselves. We can change in a negative way just as easily, if not easier,
Yes,
than a
yes.
positive way.
And an example of how we would change in a negative way in terms of pain is to really focus on the pain. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the pain really becomes part of the person's identity. It becomes embodied in even their facial expression, which is muscles moving, creating that, right? In their demeanor, in their relationships. And it's almost like they walk in the door with a sign, I have back pain, right? That it becomes so much of their identity. And
Yeah,
then often they go to a practitioner, and the practitioner is focusing on analyzing the pain, talking about what level is the pain, how is the pain today, right? And deciding what it is that's creating the pain, trying to diagnose what it is and to treat it, which just
yeah,
puts the brain's more attention on it. And I think of pain as like a fire alarm going off in the brain. And the more attention we give to it, the more it lights
oxygen.
up in the brain, and the more
Yeah,
cortical real estate it occupies in the brain, which then feeds the person's um, perception of themselves, and it becomes more and more of a trap. And
yeah.
you and I have worked with a lot of people who have been in that trap for decades of their lives. So, how do we get them out of that? And you've been saying this for as long as I've known you, which is give them a positive movement experience. So if they have an experience that yes, they can be comfortable and they can move, that's the door in. We're already starting to shift their perception.
Yeah,
If we tell them everything that's wrong with them, that's creating the pain, we're helping them grow the pain and the sense of themselves. So, what is practiced in the Feldenkrais method, and that I found to be extremely effective, is to work as far away from the pain as possible. So, and it's critical that the person is comfortable, right? So if you've got their fight or flight response switched on because you're putting them in a situation that's too much for them to balance, too much for them to be comfortable, and you're asking them to do something on top of it, they can't hear you. Their nervous system cannot hear you because that pain is just blaring too loud. So we have to get them super comfortable, peaceful, and begin to shift them out of that fight or flight mode through tools of neuroplastic change, going inside, accessing breath, accessing ways of shifting into a more relaxed state of being so that their system can start to hear us. And by working further away from the area of pain, we're still working with the area of pain because the organization of the nervous system is throughout the entire person, right? So it's like if I go down to their foot is responding to the pain as well if they have neck pain. Like it's the whole, but the further I go away from it, the further I take their brain's attention away from it. And the more soft I am, it's like I'm whispering. So that fire alarm has to quiet down a little bit and come into a mode of sensing. I bring them into a mode of sensing, and I'm looking for cues. What are they getting tighter with what I do? Do I need to make them a little more comfortable? Or am I seeing them start to take deeper breaths? Am I seeing their face start to relax? Those are some of the things that I'm looking for to know that I'm in.
yeah, yeah. And I think, we talk about centralized pain. You're talking about where the pain no longer is necessarily part of the external nociceptive system. It's like we've continued to feed that neurological pattern, that those breakers, we've continued to feed them and stimulate them to where now they just need a little external trigger or an excitement or a fear and they run. And if we can't somehow come back in and the reprogramming, which is what we're excited about talking today, if we
Yes.
can't if we can't come back in and create a different information coming in. And this was something Adrienne Lowe had talked about on one of the podcast webinars, probably almost a year ago. Looking at how information comes into the thalamus and other parts of the brain, but gets identified as being, this is pain information coming in. And it goes to the history part of the brain. And this was the important part that he was saying, is the parietal part of the brain has the memory of how we hurt ourselves, or what we believe, or the story that we've told ourselves of why we have this pain. And the reason why I like to bring that up is because we often, as the practitioners, are the one that are feeding, as you mentioned, the history and the library inside that parietal lobe of, oh my gosh, you have a herniated disc. It's amazing you can walk. Or, it's you're probably going to have surgery or fusion. Or, I know a lot of people that have been disabled by this injury. So it's like when they hear those things from an authority, or we even start putting out things like, saying that diagnosis of you got a pelvic torsion, or I think you have a leg length discrepancy, or you have a scoliosis. We don't realize how that data is being recorded into our clients' brains and into their nervous systems. And that's why, to me, and we've talked about this, and like, how can we really use that soft sound, those positive movement experiences, even the words we pick when we talk about when they want clarification of a diagnosis, how do we soften that of making it so it's not a, yes, most people do have this, or you are going to suffer with this, and be honest, but also not be the ones feeding into that fire. We're not throwing more oxygen onto that fire.
What I always like to keep in mind is that whatever they're doing to manage themselves is a brilliant reflection of the intelligence of their nervous system. So rather than looking at what they're doing and telling them all the things that are wrong, looking at them with the eye of amazement, that amidst whatever they're dealing with, they look at what they can do. Like, I turn my eyes to what can they do and how are they managing successfully. And I help bring their attention to that.
I love
and
that.
I'm seeking what can move freely, what can move comfortably. And from there, we're going to start to grow that cortical real estate in the brain. And that's going to then gradually over time, the problem becomes much smaller. When they find, our bodies have so many options, right? So whatever they injured is one small part of the entire being. So let's look at what's possible instead of what's wrong.
I love that. I love that. And that was, that was even going back when working on the dissertation, was the idea we realized was, if we influence their belief in a positive way through movement, successful movement, that we shifted their paradigm of believing that they were not going to get better. We were using the self-efficacy scale and looking at a couple other psychosocial measures, and realized that those had much higher predictors of people being happy and healthy again than things like strength or range of motion or balance. And what we realized was that in the behavioral psychology literature, this was Hoskins up in Buffalo, New York, at the Neurosurgery Center. His conclusion through the behavioral science was sort of a diagnose adios, which was, if you have these low scores on these predictive scales, you were not going to get better no matter what we did, surgery, physical therapy, anything. And if you got a high score on the scale, you were going to get better no matter anything. So we really still didn't need to do physical therapy or surgery. So it's really a sort of a weird paradigm of thinking that there's nothing we could do for these people when we know that we're having positive experiences, but we're looking at the wrong measurements. And so what we showed was that by creating those positive movement experiences without pain, that did not increase pain, that their self-efficacy score did start to change to the positive.
Yes.
And that to me was the sign of the neuroplasticity that was happening there, that they moved into positive, and all of a sudden now it's like they were returning back to life, and their self-efficacies were predicting it. And that was a big shift for us in Polestar back 20 plus years ago, of thinking like, hey, let's not get caught up in ab strength, pelvic floor strength, range of motion. Those will all be natural byproducts of the work that we do in Pilates and gyro and yoga. It's going to be a natural byproduct to have strength and flexibility. let's focus on these positive movement experiences, especially for our clients that are suffering.
And we happen to be speaking about pain, but everyone has an image of themselves that, oh, I have bad posture, I have tight hamstrings, something they walk in the door with that often we as clinicians feed into, right? And again, instead of saying that strategy is there for a reason, and why is their body doing that? Let me assist it. So one of the things we do is assist what their body's trying to do rather than fight it, right? Rather than trying to stretch a tight muscle, put it in a place that it can relax and find other areas that can move easily, would be a simple example. So how do these patterns become their movements when they walk in the door, or how they perceive themselves? And if you think of movement as life, there's neural activity as movement, from the very generation of the inside the two cells connecting and becoming a fetus, right? And inside the womb, even, right? There's movement happening. And then we're the only species that then takes like a full year to become able to walk. Like a colt is born, they get up right away. And through that period of time, there's a long period of exploration, and the baby is sensing, the baby is wanting food, for example, and learning to reach for things, and hitting on the bed, feeling what a foot feels like, right? Opening and closing a hand, bringing a hand to a mouth, right? And when they start to then become learning to walk, they're playing with their foot position on the floor, and then whoops, they topple over, and then a different position, whoops, they topple over the other way. It's through a process of experimentation, sensing, experimentation, desire, that's leading them to learn. And each of those pieces along the way is creating a neural network into their brain, a pattern. And these patterns then develop over time, and some become habits, thankfully, right? So we don't have to think about how we could walk, how we need to walk. But isn't it rather silly to think of telling a child how to walk, how to learn to walk, by instructing them about the muscles that need to work? Yet that's what we do as clinicians. Contract your transverse abdominals, right? And use your hamstrings, and etc. Your oblique abdominals as you finish the exhale, but by the time you think about it, it's way too late. I mean, the patterns of habit are operate with lightning speed. They've happened much faster than thought, especially when they become habitual.
Yeah. Yeah. Anticipation. I mean, that's how we learn, right? We understand. If I just tell you to imagine lifting up a gallon of milk, you know what it weighs because you've done it so many times. Your body naturally is going to create that proper organization for the anticipation in 50 milliseconds. It's a spinal cord reflex. Hey, you've got some presentation to share with us, which I think is fascinating, Angela. And let's maybe move ahead with time sensitivity.
Yeah.
While that's coming up, Sarah Edwards, a longtime participant and always has great questions with us from England. I don't know if you can see her question or not, directed to you, and really more down towards the middle of it, a client, and just the idea of looking for the positive movement experience in the part of the body that can move, that's away from that. I didn't know if you wanted to, if she felt like it was addressed enough. She said, I use breath work a lot to find her parasympathetic state. Know she needs footwork and overall balance work, visual and vestibular systems. Might it help to focus on a completely different area, such as thoracic movement or arm movement, etc.? I highlight every win we have in our sessions, but she retells her story every time. I try and emphasize how far she's come. So I don't know if you want to reiterate or just confirm that.
Yeah, I think your thinking is along the right track, and that's so common that people tell their stories again and again. And if we take them into a sensory experience, we can begin to start to shift that. So if we begin to ask them inquiring questions about um, the how they feel if they're lying on the reformer, how they feel the contact of the reformer. So you start to take their attention into sensation, giving them imagery, and giving them experiments to try, things to do. And it's great using the breath to relax the nervous system. There are a number of different ways, doors into that, and they're all very primal. So they tap into the lower levels of organization of the nervous system that are not only there through developmental movement, but they're there through evolutionary movement. Like, for example, breath has been with us for billions of years, right? That's one of the ways we can access the organization of the nervous system so directly there. So have our jaws and tongues and eyes. So, for example, to those are some of the things in the course we delve into in terms of how to get into those lower levels, those deeper levels of organization. And that's what I learned a lot through the Feldenkrais training. And let's talk about that, and we'll come back around to this question. Dr. Feldenkrais was a physicist, a brilliant physicist who led a very fascinating life. And he created the Feldenkrais method. To my mind, he was a pioneering neuroplastician, about 60 years ahead of it becoming recognized as science. He was also a judo master. So he taught judo. So he was a teacher of movement from early on in his life, and knew body mechanics through using forces and finding the best trajectories of force in movement as a judo master. And he injured his knee at one point in time, and surgeries were not in the 1920s what they are today for a knee injury, and was given very poor potential for a positive outcome. So he used his scientific mind and creativity to begin experimenting on himself. So, and that goes back to what we were talking about with okay, that part's not working, so what else can work? Like if you can't use the knee to push up the stairs, how can the rest of the body, the hips, the pelvis, the foot, how can the rest of the body be used in order to be able to mobilize oneself, even though one part is not functioning as well? So he was a scientist, and he worked a lot with the skeleton, again, looking at the lines of force through the system and wanting to balance the work around all of the muscles to minimize it, to move through the skeleton more directly. So that when it's like if you have the roof of a building not over the foundation of the building, it takes a lot more tension to hold it up. So by learning to move through the bones, and you've talked about bony rhythms, Brent, many times in Eric Franklin's work, but thinking through the line of the bones as the most efficient trajectory. He came up with two methods. One was awareness through movement, and it's often taught beginning lying on the floor. So taking taking gravity out of the picture, the stress of dealing with gravity out of the picture. And these movements are experimental. So guided explorations of movement. So what you'll notice in these pictures is that not everyone in the room is doing the same thing. As a matter of fact, you won't find two people doing the exact same thing because none of us have the exact same bodies. So rather than him showing, do it this way, or telling people to do it a certain way, he would invite people through cueing to explore different ways of doing it, trusting that the brilliance of their nervous system would find the right way and would recognize it as such. So when something feels easy, when something feels good, when something feels pleasurable, our nervous system is attracted to that. And people will sometimes say, well, how am I going to remember this feeling? And it will become embedded because the nervous system wants to take care of us. It's not our enemy. It's not trying to make our shoulders tight, right? It's our friend. If we can show them a more pleasurable, easier way of doing something that they can feel in their own experience, they're going to recall that. Their nervous system will want to hang on to it.
I love that idea of the nervous system being our friend. I think that, we have this internal dialogue that distracts us from that. So it's, to me, if I can make a highlight on that, being the friend and wanting us to find efficiency and comfort and pleasure is,
Trusting it. We can completely trust on that as reliable. We just need to give it a positive experience. So he also created a hands-on method called functional integration, where he's integrating his own movement as somewhat of a feedback system with the person who's moving, and using like small grams of pressure. There's never a pushing or a level of pressure that falsely imposes movement on the person. He's seeking where can they move easily, and let me help them, and let me take over for them. Let me make it even easier so that they gain a sense of ease with the movement, and then expand it through variability. He also based his work tremendously on developmental movement. And he worked with many, many children who had parts of their brain that was even completely missing, and was able to help these children not only become able to move, walk, function, but to become highly performing adults with degrees and professions. And how did he do that? He went back and led them through the elements of developmental movement that they had not been able to experience, knowing that the brain would recognize them and embody them, and was extremely successful in doing that. So a lot of the movements we work with as Feldenkrais practitioners are based on developmental movements. And he's working on giving feedback. So in this example, for example, he's not asking that boy to create an exercise, which you could say, with that roller. No, he's realizing that that boy's foot has never felt the floor the way a baby's foot would feel the floor to learn to stand on it. He's giving the feedback that that person never had. And one of the things I love is he did not like calling anyone disabled, because he felt that we are all disabled in one way or another. And if we can get past that and start thinking of everybody as perfect as they are, and look at how remarkable they are managing with the information they have, and simply provide them with more information. And sensory input is one of the most direct inputs to organize the entire nervous system. So, for example, if the listeners would like to just, one of our senses is vision, right? So if everybody could just look down to the floor and bend forward a little bit, looking down, yeah. And then with your body bent forward, see if you can look up with your eyes and see what that feels like. If that feels like it's stressful or helpful, now sit up. Now look up and let your chest lift up to the ceiling. How's that feel, having your eyes up there? Now leave your chest up to the ceiling and see what it feels like to put your eyes downward. A little strange, right? A little tense. So there are tools of organization through our senses that we can use to facilitate movement. That's one of the things we do a lot in the course that I teach. That's one of the essential elements that Dr. Feldenkrais would use to go into the organization the deeper organization, the primal organization first, and then work out from there. And adding variability, what adding variability does is it diversifies the branches in the nervous system. Okay, so the other method I teach is the gyrotonic method. So as I was studying the Feldenkrais method, I became a little bit challenged with matching it to Pilates. And part of what I was looking for was systemic flowing movement that connected the movement through the entire person. And the movement of the spine as the center of this movement, the flow of the spine, then from the pelvis through the spine, out through the arms, is extremely efficient. And if you think again in terms of evolutionary movement, there was a time in the water when we were mobilizing ourselves through our spine. I mean, it's a very natural thing that movement for us primally. And most exercise systems work from the outside in, from the arms, from the leg. The gyrotonic system works from the inside out, and using breath as well. What led me to learn the gyrotonic system is most of my people were coming in with low back or neck pain, and I was seeking ways to be able to get to the thoracic spine. I was listening to one of your lectures, Brent, about get the thoracic spine moving, the shoulders and the hip, and start there. And I wanted more ways of accessing the thoracic spine. I saw a picture essentially like this, and I said, that will let me in. There's so much potential of movement and dexterity and freedom in the thoracic spine that we tend to lose culturally, that can greatly reduce the stress on the low back, on the neck, and be utilized even in doing activities like going up the stairs, for example. So that machine is also available. So, here's another part of, that same machine that's probably the most familiar piece of equipment, probably like the Pilates reformer. So there's the handle piece, and then there's the leg work piece that you see here. Now, these cables are not intended just to be resistance, though there is weight on them. They are intended to allow the body to create space. Very different idea. So you can push, the teacher Giannis is instructing him to push his feet into his hands, creating more space in his joints. So the weight is designed to support the body in creating space. And those cables are adaptable to any range of any body. So that's probably the most typical machine that people have seen. And I wanted to show a lot of other machines in this presentation that perhaps some of the listeners haven't had a chance to see. So we look at spinal motions, and especially spiraling motions, gyrotonic, gyro as in gyroscopic, as in spiraling. So a spiral is one of the most efficient ways of moving. So you talk a lot about distribution of load, which you could think of easily in flexion through one vertebra at a time. But once you add a spiral, you add varying planes of motion as well to the possibility. So you further distribute the load, not only through more segments, but through more planes of motion. The variability, and here's another picture of a spiral, in the gyrotonic method to access spiraling motions and spinal motions. So in all of these, it's the spine moving the arms, yeah? So there's always a front side and a back side of a movement, like pushing down to go up, reaching forward to reach backwards in this example, right? And with the spine in the center of the movement, moving outwards, it's called the gyrotonic expansion system. So we're always looking at expansion, creating space. So the machine that I was on before in the blue can be put into a lot of different configurations. Here's one of them. I could sit down and have it over my head. I could turn around and have it behind, those handles be behind me. I could stand up, and I could go to a lunging position. So we're incorporating the entire body with a lot of different variations. Now, what does that do in terms of neuroplasticity? So we talked about that you can build positive neuroplasticity or negative. And how do you build negative? You narrow the possibilities by doing redundant things. If you do the same way, the same workout, the same way again and again and again, your brain no longer has to pay attention to what you're doing. So it stops building new links in the brain. The more variations that we can add, the more tangents that come off of that learning, the more that learning broadens in the brain and strengthens. If it has associations, in more and more associations with different types of movement, different planes of movement, different relationships with gravity. And that's what this equipment provides for us. Going on?
Hey, Angela, can we pause here for a second? Because I
Yep.
want to reiterate this idea of redundancy and the lack of stimulus that redundancy provides. Like when you've sort of mastered a movement, or in Pilates, we do this quite often where they just keep doing the same exact repertoire, the same exact cues, the same exact springs.
Right.
And we know that that doesn't lead to any kind of tissue adaptation. It doesn't lead to neuroplasticity. It doesn't bring in function. How you've gone through this many times. So I'd love to take an extra minute, because this population
Yeah,
that we're
that's
here
right.
today is very
So
important.
one of the greatest researchers in neuroplasticity says that if your brain's if you're not interested, your brain isn't going to be either. So if the person doesn't have to think about it anymore, they can carry on a conversation with you as the instructor while they're doing their exercises, or their neighbor, and they're no longer having to feel, think, and figure out what they're doing. You're putting their brain to sleep, and you're actually creating negative change in their brain and reducing their potential. And that happens and we're talking about lifestyle too. So the more habitual and narrow we become in the diverse activities we have in our lives, and that's part of what happens with an aging population, is that lives tend to narrow. So, and that tends to narrow their ability to think. But it's not that the brain can't do it. It's a lot about the choices we're making. And by diversifying, what we want to do, the brain is actually hungry. It wants to be fed challenge. And we have to figure out how much to feed it at what rate. And that comes back to successful, pleasurable movement, right? So I want them to be challenged, but if I challenge them to the point that they're straining to do it, my bad, right? I have to diversify it within a level that keeps it fresh, keeps it new, gives them new input, new things they have to think about, a different relationship with gravity, and also continues to expand the learning of what they already know without stressing them. Yeah. So sometimes you have to progress forward, sometimes you have to regress. We do a whole section of that in the course I teach. So here we have a leg extension unit. So who just uses their knees straightening back and forth? I mean, come on, that's not functional. So in this particular machine, it's designed so that where he's straightening his knees is not a typical leg press. It actually elongates and allows there to be space in the knee. It requires the organization of the foot, the organization of the pelvis. Now we're adding the organization of the trunk to it. And he can do this in this position, like his arching and curling, he can do with that what's called a wing master in his hand. He could be doing a rowing motion, doing single legs. Again, the more variations we give, the greater the learning, the greater the positive neuroplastic change.
So another quick comment on that, regarding the adaptation. So I was thinking, as you were talking about the neuroplasticity, the same thing is true with tissue adaptation. As we think of load and endurance, or we think of new versus old kind of movement in the nervous system, that if we don't create enough strain on the nervous system, there's no change, there's no evolution.
That's right.
If we do too much, it can do harm. It's the same thing we're looking at myofascial tissue or kidneys or any tissue in our body. It's like the whole idea is that we have to try to find that right amount of load, and load's probably the best word, because I love the word load. Could be mental load, it could be conscientious load,
That's right.
it could be tissue load. But if we don't create enough load, and I think this is what I was really hoping to bring out today, and you hit it right on the head, is that we have to diversify the load and the attention to be able to create the changes that we're hoping to change. And it's through that process that brings about the greatest evolution of the individual and their ability to participate more fully in life with that joy that you're talking about. And those that are familiar with the physiological load chart, it's no different in the neuroplasticity chart. It's the same thing. We're adaptive animals and we have sensitivities. And if we go too far beyond those sensitivities, we do harm. If we don't go far enough, we don't make change.
And I'd just like to emphasize that we have to take responsibility as teachers to be ready to adjust every single day with every single client, whether we're going to progress or regress, to match them in terms of do they need more stimulus today or do they need more support? Do we need to slow down today? Because sometimes slowing down gives more information than speeding up, which is something we should come back to. This is the same machine as you saw before in that last movement, different movement. So you can see how one leg can be used, adding a spiraling movement with the eyes guiding the movement. A lot of nice trunk rotation there as well. And here we have a completely different environment. So his feet can go around in circles. So that spirals around where he is, which challenges balance. It challenges the organization of the feet, of the hips, of the torso. And fortunately, there's handles to hold on to in the beginning, learning to use it. But that's quite free. And that can be used not only standing on it as he is, but you can use it with the hands on it. You can use it on lying on your back with your feet on it, moving side to side or around. You can do spinning like turns as a dancer on this piece of equipment. So again, variations. And when the piece is moving, you have to think to figure out what you're doing if you want to stay on it, right? So it gives us feedback into where's my center? Where's my central axis? And I challenge it in every different way I can come up with so that it's crystal clear in their reference. And working in every different plane of motion, right? So not only are we touching different muscles, different fibers of the muscles, different organizations, we're touching different neural links, right? So it's like if you could do a motion with your arm coming over, sitting down or standing up. Now, what about in this position? That's the same machine that we saw in the beginning with the hands on the handles where I was speaking about the use of the trunk. So it's extremely adaptable to many different positions. And the other thing, you were talking about load, and just the organization of ground force in relation to it is so critical. So he has to organize the weight shift timing as well, which is incredibly functional, right? Okay, this is that same machine that you saw where he was standing on the rotating disc, different setup. So, and we can do different positions of the hands, different positions of the head, again, creating variations. So look at the access to the upper T-spine there in terms of the organization of the shoulder girdle, one of the toughest places to get moving of all, and this goes right to it. Again, working the shoulder in every different way that we can. And again, changing the body weight, the ground force. And then doing stretches, not just passively, but actively. So I'm on a sliding surface here, right? So I have to pay attention to my balance, and I'm organizing. I'm not just stretching my quad, I'm organizing my entire self. That includes my eyes. And so a lot of times I hear people say, well, gyrotonic is doesn't create stability. It makes people hyper flexible. Well, in the move you saw me doing just then, and in this move, you have to balance the strength and the flexibility, or you cannot do it. So in this position, he has to be so fiercely strong through his entire body, out through his heels, to be able to get into that depth of his shoulders. If not, he's not going to succeed. And that he's on where his feet are, that slides back and forth. So it can slide right out from under him. So we create environments where the stretch is balanced with the strength. So you're only stretching as far as you can control. And that's our objective. So we're balancing the strength and the flexibility. And this is an extreme example of it, but I think it gets the point across, right?
I think that whole idea that we always, when people ask me, can I, do the stretching with Pilates? I'm like, well, you're really going to be doing power and mobility simultaneously in the training, and even more so in gyrotonic. But the idea that we don't really want to isolate muscle strength or isolate muscle flexibility or tissue flexibility. If we want to have a movement
to integrate it through the entire body.
Yeah, and the focus is movement, and movement demands power and mobility.
That's right.
It's not that we're going to isolate the mobility or isolate the power. Right.
It's not an either or. Right. Yeah. Right. So in this, turns out to be like a running motion. So those sliders will exchange. So he's having to work on the timing of the exchange of the legs, deep abdominal work, as well as managing the trunk. And this can be done in various positions of the spine. It can be done sideways. It can be done lying on the back. So another variation, moving side to side. Again, we don't want to just work forward and back. And look at the position of the ankles and the feet, very much like a skater would be, right? So the dexterity of the feet and moving side to side is really important and often neglected. Okay, so this lovely woman is no longer with us, a lovely client of mine who I'm going to share some pictures with you now that help to change the idea. Like someone just told me that they were referred to us for gyrotonic, and they said, my Pilates teacher said it's too advanced. Gyrotonic's too advanced for me. And I just want to show you the type of people that we can do gyrotonic with. So at this point in this woman's life, I was literally transferring her from her car into the studio to get her onto this machine. But look at the delight in her face to be able to have some freedom and move there. I'm able to then transfer her into a position lying down, and she giggled and would love it because she could have some freedom to move. So I have people come in wheelchairs, on crutches. We can adapt. It's an extremely supportive environment. And now I admit in some of those slides we were kind of showing off there, I admit, but it gives the wrong impression sometimes. That's why I threw in some of these other pictures. I want you to see other populations and the availability of the system for them. So this guy just came in wanting to be able to tie his shoes. He lost the ability to tie his shoes. Now he's doing advanced level, what we call level 2 levels of gyrotonic. And his wife had to convince him over about 2 years to come in for his first session. Now they fight over having the spot because he loves it so much, because it's improved his golf game and he can tie his shoes. This woman has been through a fractured femur, a fractured humerus, and a broken pelvis. And she's come back around through each of them. She doesn't quit, neither do we. And look at her here. She's in her late 80s. And day by day, she'd just get a little bit better, a little bit better, and a little bit better. You'd never know that she's in her late 80s or that she's had any of those injuries, and takes such pleasure in the movement. And look at that for her gait. Just wonderful. All different sizes, all different shapes. We can adjust the equipment for the person walking in the door. This woman is in pain walking, but she gets on the machine and she's free. I love this shot. So this
It's
gentleman
beautiful.
has a lumbar fusion that includes his sacrum and 2 full knee replacements. So that handle machine that I was on in the very beginning, I told you it could go to lots and lots of different positions. Look at the beautiful access to his thoracic spine here, right? That he so needs with those fusions and those 2 knee replacements. Yeah. And he never misses a session. He's got a machine at home. But that I just wanted to show you, we can adapt. The equipment can adapt to the person. I love that shot.
It's beautiful.
We'll leave it there.
So there's a couple questions. I know we're just about out of time, and I just, you're making me think that I need to be back on the gyrotonic machines all over
Anytime you
again.
come on over, Brent.
And I'm going to take you up on it. I'm coming down in a week, and we're going to get together. So, and then I do have one. I just need to practice and use it, don't I? Well, listen, that's beautiful. There were a couple questions in the last little bit there, and I just want to make sure that we don't leave them unanswered. One was from Emily Bondi, and she had mentioned that speak a little bit about specific breath that is used. I found it very interesting when I had opportunity to experience the mat and the machine work in the gyrotonic. So that was Emily's question.
Speaking to breath work, both in the Feldenkrais method and in gyrotonic, we don't use one particular breath pattern. And I think that's really, really important, is that we because breath can become fixated just like any other movement pattern. And so then people are only using certain parts of their lungs. They're using the same breath pattern no matter what they're doing. So what we do is we like to perturb the different breathing patterns and have people vary the breath pattern according to different things that they're doing, so that then their breath will be more flexible to naturally adapt appropriately to the situation at hand.
Yeah, that's awesome. The other question that came up, which I think is the same answer that we provide in Pilates, and you made a comment that a Pilates teacher had mentioned that gyro was too advanced for the client, and I was thinking, like, people say that ignorantly all the time about us in Pilates as well. Like they just don't know. They see the pictures of somebody doing a squirrel on the trapeze table. I think there's no way they can do that. But the question is looking at things where somebody does have complications of bone density. They're dealing with osteoporosis. And, in gyrotonic, you take the same precautions. You take the same idea of respecting the pathology, just like you talked about working with somebody with a fusion.
That's right.
You're taking the same responsibilities we would with any movement practitioner with those things. What I'd like to ask you, though, is that because of the nature, both of how I would treat somebody with osteoporosis and how you would treat them, it really comes down to the individual and looking at that distribution and movement as well. What are some of your thoughts and maybe experiences working with somebody that has bone density issues in the past? You have plenty of them.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, one of the things that disturbs me the most is when people say, I'm not supposed to flex. And it's like, I understand the risk of compressive flexion for someone with osteoporosis. However, functionally, people need options to bend down and pick things up. I mean, they need options through their entire system, right? So I'm really saddened when someone has been given that restriction, because it's a lot about how you flex, for one thing. And so in gyrotonic expansion system, we're not compressing as we're flexing. And we have the option to adapt the movement to whatever range is appropriate for that individual, which is then going to be varied according to things such as, for example, their ability to recruit their trunk muscles to decompress their thoracic spine as they're moving, right? So developing those sorts of skills to enable them to expand their movement potential. The other thing is, again, the vast variety of setups that we can do, so that we can keep people safe.
Yeah. And I think that, even the idea of, we often get afraid of these motions. And, when we had done that study years ago, we had looked at the concept of distribution of movement equals distribution of force. So when we really understand the anatomy, we understand the pathology, we understand the human behavior, as you're talking about, they got to tie their shoes, they got to wipe their bottoms, they want to be intimate. All of those involve flexion in the body. And we know that there are thousands of degrees, millions of degrees of freedom when we look at all of the body's capacity to be able to move through space in a complex movement. And I remember having a ballet teacher who, thinking of her being in her 70s or 80s and being able to do these beautiful movements, knowing full well that she had bone density issues, knew that she had osteoporosis. Yeah. But the idea is that she had so much grace that she also had body awareness and knew that she wasn't going to go into a position that was going to create so much compression.
And she used her whole self, no doubt, as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, listen, Angela, love you to pieces, and I'm sold. I'm back on. I'm going to come see you in a week. I'll give you a call afterwards. We'll make an appointment. The thing that I'd like to do now is, you have a course. I'd like you to tell everybody about your new course that's coming out. We're excited to promote it with you and talk to us a little bit about the neuroplasticity course. It applies to everybody.
I'm really excited about it. It's called Neuroplasticity and Exploration Through Movement, and you helped me premiere that course, and I've now brought it online. So it goes much more in depth into the science that we just touched on a little bit, the science of neuroplasticity and the relationship of that to movement. Then we go into multiple explorations of movement so that people have an internalized experience of how to use deeper levels of movement at very gentle levels to profoundly change entire movement patterns. So they experience it within themselves. Then we have labs of applications as well as discussions. And I've set up the course so we then have 2 weeks between sessions. So there's 3 segments so people can absorb, integrate, practice, play with, come up with real questions by the time we come back, because it's such a paradigm shift. I want people to be able to come back with real questions before we go to the next layer. So it happens over 3 days. And Pilates instructors gain 16 hours of CECs. Also, the recordings are available for an unlimited amount of time. People have full access to them permanently after the course. And it can be taken live, which means I get an interface with you, or it can be taken by recording. Either way.
That's awesome, Angela. So the link for that will come out in the post recording. So keep your eyes open. That Melissa will be sending out tomorrow.
One more thing to offer is that anyone who's intrigued about the gyrotonic system, we offer a full spectrum of gyrotonic educational training at Gyrotonic Coral Gables.
Yeah. Best gyrotonic teacher in the world, Angela Crowley. Again, thank you for joining us today, Angela. Thank you, all Brent. Of you, for being with us and listening to Angela's
Thanks,
great
everyone.
wisdom. Again, Polestar Pilates, bringing the world physical, emotional, and spiritual alignment. And above all things, we ask that you be kind. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon.